3 months had passed since the Battle of Valeth, and the galaxy had changed. Commander Ciora stood in the great assembly hall of the Galactic Council. Surrounded by representatives from over 50 species, she had never imagined she would be here, speaking before the most powerful beings in known space. But Admiral Choi had asked for her help, and Ciora had given her word. The council session had been called to address the Kethrani threat, and the debate had been going on for hours. Many species were afraid. The Melleran delegate had argued for isolation, suggesting that each species should focus on defending their own systems. The Vantiri representative had proposed appeasement, offering to sacrifice uninhabited worlds to the swarm in hopes of satisfying their hunger. Others had simply expressed despair, believing that nothing could stop a threat as overwhelming as the awakened Kethrani. Through it all, Admiral Yuna Choi had stood at the center of the chamber, presenting intelligence reports and tactical assessments with calm professionalism. But Ciora could see that the council was not convinced. They listened to the human admiral with polite attention, but their body language revealed deep skepticism. These species had spent generations viewing humans as dangerous primitives, barely civilized Deathworlders who solved every problem with violence. They did not trust humanity. They did not understand humanity, and they certainly did not want to follow humanity into a war that might consume them all. Finally, the Sorvan ambassador, Teleth, raised her scaled hand and addressed the chamber. "Admiral Choi," she said, "your fleet performed admirably in the defense of Valeth, and no one here disputes the courage of your soldiers. But," Admiral Choi asked, a voice carefully neutral, "but many of us are uncertain whether an alliance with humanity is wise." Teleth continued, "Your species has been part of galactic civilization for less than a century, and your methods are often brutal and unpredictable." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. "Perhaps," Teleth suggested carefully, "it would be better if each species contributed resources to a joint defense fund, which could be administered by a neutral party, rather than placing our fleets under human command." Admiral Choi nodded slowly. "I understand your concerns, Ambassador," she said, "and I will not pretend that humanity has always acted wisely or well." She paused and looked around the chamber. "But I would like to offer Commander Ciora of the Valeth the opportunity to speak," she said. "She witnessed the battle firsthand, and I believe her perspective may be valuable." All eyes turned to Ciora, and she felt her hearts racing. She had prepared remarks, careful diplomatic statements designed to support Admiral Choi without offending anyone. But standing there, looking at the suspicious faces of the council members, Ciora realized that careful diplomacy was not what this moment required. She stepped forward and began to speak. "3 months ago," she said, "my people faced extinction." Her voice was steady, despite the emotion churning inside her. "The Kethrani came to our world with the intention of consuming every living being on our planet, and we had no way to stop them." She paused and looked directly at Ambassador Teleth. "We called for help from the Galactic Council, and we were told that no one could reach us in time." Tyla's scales flushed with embarrassment, but she did not interrupt. "We were told that there was only one species that might be able to help us," Ciora continued. "But we were also warned that this species was dangerous and unpredictable and violent." She turned to look at Admiral Choi, who stood quietly with her hands clasped behind her back. "We called the humans anyway, because we had no other choice." Ciora moved to the center of the chamber, her forearms spread wide. "And do you know what happened?" she asked the council. "The humans came." Her voice rose with passion. "They did not ask what we could offer them in return, and they did not demand payment or treaties or political concessions," she said. "They simply received our distress signal and sent their fleet. 47 human ships faced over 200 Kethrani vessels," Ciora continued. "And I watched from my command center as those 47 ships tore the swarm apart. She pointed at the assembled delegates. I watched human ships take damage that would have destroyed any of your vessels. And I watched them keep fighting, she said. I watched a human cruiser with half its hull torn away ram a Kethrani carrier rather than retreat. And I watched the crew of that cruiser die so that my people could live. Tears were streaming down her face now. But she did not care. 437 humans died defending Valeth, she said, her voice cracking. 437 strangers, who owed us nothing, gave their lives for a species they had never met. She turned back to face Admiral Choi. After the battle, I asked the Admiral why her people would make such a sacrifice, Siora said. And do you know what she told me? The chamber was silent. She told me that they fight because they can, and because if they do not, then who will? Siora wiped her eyes with one of her hands and faced the council again. You call them Deathworlders, she said. And you fear them because of their strength and their resilience and their capacity for violence. She shook her head. But I have seen what the humans truly are. Her voice steadied, and she spoke with absolute conviction. They are protectors. They are guardians. They are the species that runs toward danger when everyone else runs away. She pointed at the holographic display showing the location of the awakening Kethrani swarm. That threat will not stop at Valeth, she said. It will not stop at the borders of any single system or species. And it will consume everything in its path unless we stand together. She looked around the chamber one final time. I was afraid of humans before I met them, she admitted. But now I am honored to call them allies. She returned to her position beside Admiral Choi and stood tall. The Valeth will stand with humanity, she declared. And I urge every species in this chamber to do the same. Silence hung over the assembly for a long moment. Then Ambassador Talith rose from her seat. The Sorvan Union will stand with humanity, she announced one by one. Other delegates rose. The Mellerin, the Vantiri, the Kishul, the Tormund species that had feared and distrusted humans for generations were now pledging their support. By the time the last delegate had spoken, over 40 species had committed to the alliance. Admiral Choi turned to Siora with something like wonder in her eyes. Thank you, Commander, she said quietly. You saved my people, Siora replied. The least I can do is help you save everyone else. The following weeks were a flurry of activity. Fleets were assembled. Strategies were coordinated, and supply lines were established. A joint command structure was created, with Admiral Choi serving as overall military commander and representatives from each allied species contributing to tactical planning. Siora was appointed as official liaison between the Valeth and the human fleet, a role she accepted with pride. The morning before the allied fleet departed for Kethrani space, she stood with Admiral Choi on the observation deck of the Resolute, watching the assembled ships. It was the largest military force the galaxy had ever seen. Thousands of vessels from dozens of species, all united against a common enemy. Are you afraid? Siora asked. Admiral Choi nodded. Always, she admitted. Fear keeps us sharp, and it reminds us what we are fighting for. She turned to look at Siora. But we do not fight alone anymore, she said. We fight for everyone who answered the call. Siora reached out and placed one of her hands on the Admiral's shoulder. Then let us go remind the Kethrani why they should have stayed asleep. Admiral Choi smiled. A real smile this time. I like the way you think, Commander. The fleet departed, jumping to faster than light travel in perfect coordination. Behind them, across the galaxy, a new message was spreading through communication networks and whispered conversations. It was a message of hope, a message of defiance, a message that would echo through history. When you are in danger, call the humans, the message said. They will come, and across the vast emptiness of space, the Deathworlders flew toward the enemy, ready to fight, ready to protect, ready to show the galaxy what humanity truly meant. The battle was over. Commander Siora stood on the landing platform outside the listening array, watching as human shuttles descended through the atmosphere. The sky above her was scarred with the debris of the conflict. Pieces of destroyed ships burning like falling stars as they entered the atmosphere. The Kethrani swarm had been annihilated. Over 200 organic vessels had been reduced to drifting wreckage. And the Kethrani command ship had been captured intact after a boarding action that Siora could barely comprehend. Human soldiers had breached the vessel and fought the Kethrani. In close combat they had won, but victory had come at a terrible price. Siora had reviewed the casualty reports, and the numbers haunted her. 12 human ships destroyed, 8 more severely damaged, 437 human lives lost, 437 strangers who had traveled across the stars to defend a species they had never met, and who would never return home to their families. The lead shuttle touched down on the landing platform, and Siora straightened her posture as the ramp lowered. She had requested a meeting with Admiral Choi, and she had been informed that the Admiral would come to the surface personally. A human woman descended the ramp, and Siora felt a moment of surprise. Admiral Choi was smaller than she had expected. The Valith averaged about 2 meters in height, and Siora had assumed that Deathworlders would be larger and more physically imposing. But Admiral Choi stood perhaps 1.75 meters tall, with dark hair pulled back from a face that showed obvious signs of exhaustion. Her uniform was wrinkled, and there were dark circles under her eyes. She looked tired. She looked old. She looked like someone who had seen too much death. But when her eyes met Siora's, the Valith commander saw something else beneath the exhaustion: strength, determination, an absolute refusal to break, no matter the cost. "Commander Siora," Admiral Choi said, extending one hand in the human greeting gesture. "It is good to finally meet you in person." Siora had studied human customs before this meeting, so she reached out and clasped the Admiral's hand. The grip was firm and warm. "Admiral Choi," Siora replied, "I do not have words sufficient to express my gratitude." "No gratitude necessary," the Admiral said. Releasing Siora's hand, "We received a distress call, and we responded. But your losses," Siora said, and her voice cracked with emotion. "So many of your people died defending us." Admiral Choi was silent for a moment, and something flickered across her face: pain, grief, acceptance. "Yes," she said quietly, "they did." "Why?" Siora asked, and the question came from somewhere deep inside her. "Why would your people die for strangers you have never met? For a species that has done nothing for humanity? For a world that is not your own?" Admiral Choi considered the question carefully before answering. "On Earth," she began, "we have a saying that has guided much of our history, even when we failed to live up to it." "What saying?" "The only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good beings to do nothing," Admiral Choi said. "For most of our history, humans fought among ourselves, and we ignored the suffering of others when it was convenient to do so." She paused and looked up at the scarred sky. "But when we finally reached the stars and discovered that we were not alone, something changed in us," she continued. "We realized that the galaxy is full of threats that do not care about borders or species or politics. And we realized that if we do not stand together, we will fall apart. So you fight for everyone?" Siora asked. "We fight for anyone who asks," Admiral Choi replied simply. "We fight because we can, and because if we do not, then who will?" Siora felt tears forming in her eyes again. "I am so sorry," she whispered. "I called for help, and your people paid the price." Admiral Choi reached out and placed one hand on Siora's shoulder. The touch was gentle, almost tender. "Commander," she said firmly, "you called for help because your people were in danger, and we came because that is what we do. So do not apologize for surviving." She squeezed Siora's shoulder once and then released her. Besides, the Admiral added, and a small smile crossed her tired face. The Kethrani had it coming. Behind the Admiral, more shuttles were landing, medical ships and supply vessels and engineering teams, all descending to provide aid to the Velith. Population Siora watched as human doctors and medics rushed out of the shuttles and began setting up treatment stations for wounded Velith. Civilians technician Minwu appeared at her side, his expression one of complete bewilderment. "Commander," he said quietly, "I have been observing the human medical teams, and one of their doctors has been working continuously for 16 hours. Minwu reported. I asked him how this was possible, and he told me it was because of something called adrenaline, and something called coffee, and something called stubbornness. Despite everything." Siora felt herself smile. "The humans are very strange," she said. "Yes," Minwu agreed. "But I am beginning to think that strange is not the same as dangerous." Admiral Choi had moved away to coordinate with her officers, but she returned a few moments later with a datapad in her hand. Her expression had changed. The exhaustion was still there, but now it was mixed with something harder, concern. "Commander Siora," she said, "I need to share some intelligence with you." "What is it?" "Our boarding teams captured several Kethrani officers alive," Admiral Choi explained. "We have been interrogating them, and we have learned something troubling." Siora felt a chill run through her body. "Tell me." "This fleet was a scouting force," Admiral Choi said. "The Kethrani swarm has been dormant for centuries, but they are awakening now, and there are more of them." "How many more?" "We do not know exactly," the Admiral admitted, "but based on what the prisoners have told us, this scouting force represented less than 1% of the total swarm." Less than 1%, Siora's mind struggled to process that number. If 200 ships were less than 1%, then the full swarm numbered in the tens of thousands. Then we are still in danger. Siora said, "Everyone is in danger," Admiral Choi replied grimly. "The Kethrani do not distinguish between species, and they do not stop once they start consuming." She looked up at the sky again, and her jaw tightened. "This was just the beginning," she said. "The swarm will send more ships, and they will target other worlds. And they will keep coming until they are stopped completely." "Can they be stopped?" Siora asked. Admiral Choi met her gaze, and there was fire in the human's eyes. "Yes," she said with absolute certainty. "They can be stopped, but not by humanity alone." "What do you mean?" "I am going to call an emergency session of the Galactic Council," Admiral Choi explained. "I am going to present everything we have learned about the Kethrani, and I am going to ask the other species to join us in a true alliance. Do you think they will agree?" Admiral Choi smiled, but there was no humor in it. "I do not know," she admitted. "Many species fear us, and many more do not trust us. But I am hoping that what happened here today will change some minds." She turned to look at Siora directly. "I am hoping that you will help me convince them." Siora blinked in surprise. "Me?" "You witnessed what happened here," Admiral Choi said. "You saw what the Kethrani intended to do, and you saw what we were willing to sacrifice to stop them." She paused. "Your voice may carry more weight than mine, because the galaxy trusts the Velith in ways they do not trust humans." Siora considered the request. She thought about everything she had seen over the past few rotations. The terror of the approaching fleet, the desperation of the distress call, the shock of watching human ships arrive, the horror of the battle, the grief of learning how many had died, and beneath it all, the growing realization that humans were not the monsters the galaxy believed them to be. They were something else entirely, something the galaxy desperately needed. "Admiral Choi," Siora said firmly, "I will stand beside you at the council, and I will tell them what I witnessed here." Admiral Choi nodded once, and gratitude flickered across her tired face. "Thank you, Commander." Then she straightened her shoulders and looked toward the shuttles. "We have a lot of work to do," she said. "The swarm is waking, and we need to be ready." Siora followed her gaze. "Then let us begin." The space above the Valith homeworld erupted into chaos as the two fleets collided. Commander Siora stood frozen before the tactical display, watching in horrified fascination as the battle unfolded in ways she could never have imagined. The Kethrani attacked in swarms, their organic vessels moving in coordinated patterns that spoke of a hive mind controlling their actions. They relied on overwhelming numbers, surrounding their enemies and tearing them apart. Through sheer volume of attacks, it was a strategy that had allowed them to consume 3-star systems. It was a strategy that had never failed them until now. The human fleet did not behave like any military force Siora had ever seen or read about. Instead of maintaining defensive formations and trying to protect each other, the human ships scattered in what appeared to be complete chaos. They broke apart into smaller groups, then into individual vessels, each one moving independently and unpredictably. "What are they doing?" Minwu asked in confusion. "They have abandoned all tactical cohesion." But Siora was beginning to understand. The Kethrani hive mind was designed to process and respond to coordinated enemy actions when a fleet moved in formation. The swarm could predict their movements and counter them, but the humans were not moving in formation. Each human ship was fighting its own battle, making its own decisions, adapting to the chaos in real time, and the Kethrani could not keep up. Siora watched as a human destroyer, the Furious, dove directly into a cluster of Kethrani vessels that should have torn it apart. Instead of trying to evade the organic tendrils that reached for its hull, the destroyer accelerated, spinning on its axis while firing every weapon it possessed. 3 Kethrani ships were destroyed before the swarm could even react. Impossible. Minwu breathed. But it was only the beginning. Lieutenant Commander Ji-hun led a strike team of 12 gunships through the heart of the Kethrani formation. His voice crackled over the communication channels that Siora was monitoring, and what she heard shocked her to her core. "Gunship 7. Watch your starboard," Ji-hun called out. "Ugly coming in hot." "I see him, sir," another voice replied. "Taking evasive action." "Negative. Hold your position," Ji-hun ordered. "Let him commit to the attack run." "Sir?" "Trust me." Siora watched on the display as the Kethrani vessel closed on Gunship 7. Tendrils extended and ready to tear the small human ship apart at the last possible moment. Ji-hun's own vessel dropped from above, weapons blazing. The Kethrani ship was destroyed before it could complete its attack. "Nice save, Commander," Gunship 7 reported. "You owe me a drink when we get back," Ji-hun replied. And Siora could hear the smile in his voice. They were joking in the middle of a battle for survival, surrounded by enemies that wanted to consume them. The humans were joking with each other. Siora did not understand. She turned her attention to the flagship, the Resolute, where Admiral Choi was coordinating the entire engagement. The Admiral's voice was calm and steady as she issued orders, but her crew responded with an energy that bordered on enthusiasm. "Resolute. Enemy carrier approaching from bearing 270. "I see it," Admiral Choi replied. "Weapons officer. Target their propulsion systems." "Targeting, Admiral. But they are closing fast." "Good," Admiral Choi said. "Let them come." The Kethrani carrier was enormous. Easily 5 times the size of the Resolute, it bore down on the human flagship with clear intent to destroy it, and Admiral Choi did not order evasive maneuvers. Instead, she ordered her ship to accelerate directly toward the carrier. "Admiral?" the helmsman asked uncertainly. "Ramming speed," Admiral Choi commanded. "Ramming speed." "Aye." Siora gasped as the Resolute hurtled toward the Kethrani carrier on what appeared to be a suicide run, but at the last moment, the human ship twisted, firing its maneuvering thrusters in a maneuver that should have torn the vessel apart. The Resolute scraped along the underside of the Kethrani carrier, weapons firing continuously into the organic hull at point-blank range. The carrier shuddered and began to break apart. The Resolute emerged from the other side, trailing smoke and debris. Its hull scarred but intact. Damage report. Admiral Choi called out, "Hull breaches on decks 7 through 12, someone reported. Structural integrity at 62%. Acceptable, the Admiral replied. Helm, bring us around for another pass. 62% structural integrity. Any Valith ship would have been forced to withdraw with such damage. The humans kept fighting. Minwu had abandoned his station and was now standing beside Siora. His eyes fixed on the tactical display. Commander, he said quietly, I am monitoring human communication channels, and they are not panicking, Minwu said, and his voice was filled with wonder and fear. They are taking damage. They are dying, but they are not panicking. What are they doing? They are encouraging each other, Minwu said. They are making jokes. They are celebrating small victories. And they are refusing to acknowledge defeat, even when their ships are falling apart around them. Siora turned back to the display just in time to watch a human cruiser, the Indomitable, take a devastating hit from a Kethrani beam weapon. Half the ship's hull was torn away, exposing decks to the vacuum of space. Any other species would have abandoned ship. The Indomitable did not abandon ship. Instead, the crippled cruiser turned toward the nearest Kethrani vessel and accelerated. What is he doing? Siora whispered. He is using his ship as a weapon. Minwu replied in disbelief. The Indomitable struck the Kethrani carrier at full speed, both vessels disappearing in a massive explosion that destroyed 3 other swarm ships caught in the blast radius. Siora felt tears streaming down her face. She had just watched humans die to protect her world, strangers who owed the Valith. Nothing had sacrificed themselves without hesitation on the tactical display. The tide of battle was turning. The Kethrani had started with overwhelming numbers, but those numbers were shrinking rapidly. Human tactics were too unpredictable, human ships too resilient, human crews too determined. One by one, the Kethrani vessels were destroyed or crippled. And then something changed in the swarm's behavior. The remaining Kethrani ships began pulling back, retreating toward their command vessel at the edge of the combat zone. They are withdrawing, Minwu reported with obvious relief. But Admiral Choi's voice came through the communication channel, and there was no relief in her tone. Negative on enemy withdrawal, she commanded. All ships pursue and engage, Admiral? Someone on her bridge questioned. The Kethrani came here to harvest civilians, Admiral Choi said coldly. They announced their intention to consume every living being on this planet, so they do not get to leave. Siora watched in stunned silence as the human fleet surged after the retreating Kethrani. There would be no escape for the swarm. There would be no mercy. The hunters had become the hunted, and the Deathworlders were just getting started on the surface of the Valith homeworld. Millions of civilians watched the battle raging in their skies. They saw the explosions and the debris. They saw ships falling and burning, and slowly they began to understand that strangers from a distant death world were dying to give them a chance to live. The Valith had called for help, and the humans had answered. 6 rotations had passed since Commander Siora sent the distress signal, and the unknown fleet had finally arrived. The Valith sensors detected them emerging from faster-than-light travel at the edge of their system. And what Siora saw on the display screen made her blood run cold. The ships were massive, organic vessels that looked like they had been grown rather than built. Their hulls pulsed with a sickly green light, and tendrils extended from their surfaces like the limbs of some horrible deep space creature by the ancient spirits. Minwu breathed. What are those things? The answer came moments later when the lead vessel broadcast a message to the entire system. The face that appeared on the communication screen was nightmarish. It belonged to a creature with too many eyes, a mouth filled with needle-like teeth, and skin that seemed to writhe with its own terrible life. "We are the Kethrani swarm," the creature announced. Its voice a horrible clicking sound that the translation system struggled to process. "This world and all life upon it now belongs to us." Siora felt her legs weaken, and she gripped the console for support. The Kethrani. She had read about them in historical records that were centuries old. They were a species that had been declared extinct after they had consumed 3 entire star systems, devouring not just the inhabitants, but the very biological matter of the planets themselves. The Galactic Council had celebrated when the Kethrani had seemingly vanished, believing the threat had ended, but the threat had not ended. The Kethrani had simply been sleeping, waiting, gathering strength for their next harvest, and now they had chosen the Valith homeworld as their target. "We do not negotiate," the Kethrani commander continued. "We do not accept surrender, and we do not show mercy." The creature's many eyes gleamed with hunger. "You will be consumed," it said. "Your bodies will feed our young. Your planet will become a breeding ground for our next generation, and your civilization will be erased from history." Siora wanted to respond, wanted to plead or bargain or do anything that might save her people, but she knew it would be pointless. The Kethrani were not conquerors, seeking territory or resources that could be shared. They were predators, and the Valith were nothing more than prey. "Commander," Minwu said urgently, "the Kethrani fleet is beginning descent toward the planet." Siora looked at the tactical display and felt despair wash over her. The evacuation was not complete. Millions of Valith civilians were still on the surface, still making their way to the underground shelters. If the Kethrani reached the planet before the evacuation finished, those millions would die. How long until they reached the atmosphere? She asked. "At their current speed, approximately 200 heartbeats." Minwu replied, 200 heartbeats. That was all the time her people had left. Siora closed her eyes and prepared herself for the end, and then the sensors screamed with new alerts. "Commander!" Minwu shouted. New signatures detected at the edge of the system. Siora's eyes snapped open, and she stared at the display in disbelief. Ships were appearing from faster than light travel, dozens of them, emerging in a formation that spoke of military precision and aggressive intent. But these ships looked nothing like the elegant vessels that most galactic species favored. They were angular and harsh, covered in armor plating that bore the scars of countless battles. They were painted in colors of dark gray and black, and weapons bristled from every surface. They looked like they had been designed for one purpose and one purpose only: war. "The humans," Siora whispered. "The humans are here." The lead vessel broadcast an identification signal, and the name appeared on the display screen: Use Resolute, flagship of the Third Fleet, under the command of Fleet Admiral Una Choi. A new voice filled the listening array, calm and professional, despite the chaos unfolding around them. "Valith Command. This is Fleet Admiral Una Choi of the United Earth Navy," the voice said. "We have visual confirmation of hostile forces in your system." Siora rushed to the communication console. "Admiral Choi." "This is Commander Siora," she said quickly. "The attacking force identifies themselves as the Kethrani swarm, and they have announced their intention to harvest our entire population." "Understood, Commander," Admiral Choi replied. And there was no fear in her voice, only cold determination. "We have encountered Kethrani remnants before, and we know what they are capable of." "Then you know we cannot fight them," Siora said, desperately. "We have no weapons, no military capability whatsoever. That is why we are here," Admiral Choi said simply. "Recommend you complete your evacuations as quickly as possible. because this engagement may cause significant collateral effects. Siora felt tears forming in her eyes. "Admiral, there are over 200 Kethrani vessels," she said. "I count only 47 human ships." 47 is plenty," Admiral Choi replied. And something in her tone suggested she was almost amused. Kethrani rely on overwhelming numbers and biological adaptation, but they have never faced a Deathworld species in open combat on a tactical display. Siora watched as the human fleet moved into position between the Kethrani and the planet. The Kethrani commander appeared on the communication screen again, and this time its expression showed something new: uncertainty, unknown vessels. The Kethrani broadcast: "Identify yourselves and withdraw immediately, because this system has been claimed by the swarm." Admiral Choi's response was broadcast on all frequencies, ensuring that everyone in the system could hear it. "Kethrani swarm. This is Fleet Admiral Una Choi of the United Earth Navy," she said. "You have attacked a species that has requested human protection, and you have announced your intention to commit genocide against a peaceful civilization." The Admiral paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was harder than Valeth crystal. "You will withdraw from this system immediately, or you will be destroyed." The Kethrani commander laughed, a horrible clicking sound that made Siora's skin crawl. "You threaten us?" It said mockingly. "We outnumber you more than 4 to 1, and we have consumed species far more powerful than yours. You have never consumed a Deathworld species," Admiral Choi replied calmly. "And you will not start today." The Kethrani commander's many eyes narrowed, scanned those vessels. It ordered its subordinate. Siora watched as the Kethrani sensors swept across the human fleet, and she saw the exact moment when the results came back. The Kethrani commander went very still. "Category 12 Deathworld," it murmured, almost to itself. "Extreme gravity adaptation, toxic atmosphere tolerance, radiation resistance, persistence predator biology." For a moment, Siora dared to hope that the Kethrani would simply leave. But then the commander's expression twisted into something between fear and rage. "It does not matter," the Kethrani decided. "Numbers will prevail, and once we have consumed these Deathworlders, we will be stronger than ever." The Kethrani fleet surged forward, abandoning their descent toward the planet and instead rushing toward the human ship's admiral. Choi's voice came through the communication system one final time before the battle began. "All ships, weapons free," she said calmly. "Show them what humanity is made of." Minwoo moved to stand beside Siora as they watched the two fleets close the distance between them. "Commander," he said quietly, "do you think the humans can win?" Siora thought about everything she had heard about the Deathworlders: their violence, their resilience, their absolute refusal to surrender. "I do not know," she admitted. "But I think the Kethrani have made a terrible mistake." The first weapons fired, and the battle for the Valeth homeworld began. Commander Siora stood before the massive display screen in the Valeth listening array, her 4 delicate arms trembling as she processed what the sensors were showing her. The signals were unmistakable. An unknown fleet was approaching their system, and the ship signatures matched nothing in any galactic database. "Technician Minwoo," she called out, her voice barely steady. "Confirm these readings immediately." Minwoo rushed to her side, his translucent skin flickering with the pale blue light that indicated stress among their kind. He studied the data for several long moments before turning to face her with wide, fearful eyes. "Commander, the readings are accurate," he said quietly. "There are over 200 vessels approaching our system, and they will arrive in approximately 6 rotations." Siora felt her heart sink. The Valeth were not warriors. They had never been warriors. Their civilization had flourished for thousands of years precisely because they had chosen peace over conflict, diplomacy over aggression, and communication over confrontation. Their cities were Made of crystal that sang in the wind, their art was celebrated across the galaxy, their technology for communication and translation was unmatched by any other species. But they had no weapons, they had no military, they had nothing that could stop an invasion force of this size. Contact the Galactic Council immediately, Ciora ordered. We must request assistance. The response from the Council came within the hour. But it brought no comfort. Ambassador Talith of the Sorvan Union appeared on the communication screen. Her scaled face arranged in an expression of deep sympathy. Commander Ciora, she began. The Council has received your distress call and has deliberated on the matter. And? Ciora pressed, hope flickering in her chest. No member species can reach your system in time, Talith said. And her voice carried genuine regret. The nearest Sorvan fleet is 12 rotations away, and the Melloran Defense Force is even farther. Then we are doomed, Minwu whispered from behind Ciora. The Talith held up one clawed hand. There is one possibility, she said slowly, though I hesitate to mention it. Anything, Ciora said desperately. We will consider anything, the Deathworlders, Talith said. And even through the screen, Ciora could see the ambassador shudder slightly. The humans have a monitoring station that receives distress calls from this sector, and their fleet is fast. Ciora felt a chill pass through her body. She had heard the stories about humans. Everyone in the galaxy had heard the stories. They came from a planet so hostile that it was classified as a Category 12 death world, a designation reserved for environments so dangerous that most species could not survive there for even a single rotation. Earth was a world of crushing gravity, extreme temperature variations, violent weather patterns, and predators that had evolved alongside the humans. For millions of years, the humans themselves were terrifying. They could survive injuries that would kill any Valith instantly. They could function without sleep for extended periods. They consumed the flesh of other creatures for sustenance. They had spent most of their history fighting wars against each other, developing weapons and tactics with a creativity that horrified peaceful species, and they had only recently joined galactic civilization. Their integration was still ongoing, and many species viewed them with suspicion and fear. Ambassador, Ciora said carefully, are you suggesting we invite the Deathworlders into our system? I am suggesting that you have no other options, Talith replied. The humans have proven surprisingly willing to assist species in distress, and they have the capability to reach you in time. But the stories are true, Talith interrupted. All of them, and perhaps more that we have not yet heard. But the humans have also demonstrated a peculiar trait that we are still struggling to understand. What trait? They protect the weak, Talith said, and confusion was evident in her voice. They rush toward danger rather than away from it, and they seem to derive some form of satisfaction from defending those who cannot defend themselves. Ciora turned to look at Minwu. The young technician was pale with fear, but he met her gaze steadily. Commander, he said quietly, we have no weapons, no ships capable of combat, and no allies who can reach us in time. So the question is not whether we should contact the humans. Then what is the question? The question is whether we prefer to die at the hands of an unknown enemy or take our chances with the Deathworlders, Minwu said. At least with the humans, there is a possibility of survival. Ciora closed her eyes and thought of her people. She thought of the crystal cities that had taken generations to build. She thought of the children in the learning centers and the elders in the memory gardens. She thought of everything the Valith had created, and everything they still hoped to achieve. Then she opened her eyes and made her decision. Technician Minwu, she said firmly, broadcast a distress signal on the human emergency frequency. Minwu nodded and moved to the communication console. His fingers danced across the controls as he composed a message. Distress signal ready. Commander, he reported. Send it. The signal was transmitted into the void, carrying with it the desperate hope of an entire civilization. Siora expected to wait for hours, perhaps even a full rotation. For any response, she was wrong. The reply came in less than 200 heartbeats. A human voice filled the listening array, speaking in the standard galactic trade language, but with an accent that made the words sound harder and more forceful than Siora had ever heard them. Valith Listening Array. This is Earth Monitoring Station 7, the voice said. We have received your distress signal and have confirmed the approaching threat. Siora stepped forward quickly. This is Commander Siora of the Valith Listening Array, she said. We are facing an invasion by an unknown force, and we have no means of defense. Understood, Commander, the human replied. And there was something in the voice that Siora could not identify. Something that sounded almost eager. Fleet Admiral Yuna Choi has been notified, and a response force is being assembled. How long until they can reach us? The fleet will arrive in your system within 5 rotations, the human said. Possibly sooner if the Admiral pushes the engines. 5 rotations. That meant the humans would arrive before the unknown enemy hope surged through Siora. Bright and almost painful. We are grateful, she said, her voice thick with emotion. We cannot express how grateful we are. No gratitude necessary. Commander, the human replied. This is what we do. Then the voice softened slightly, and the human added 4 words that would stay with Siora for the rest of her life. Hold on, the human said. We are coming. The communication ended, and silence fell over the listening array. Minwu moved to stand beside Siora, and together they stared at the display screen showing the approaching enemy fleet. Commander, Minwu said quietly, do you think we made the right decision? Siora considered the question. Carefully, they had summoned the Deathworlders. To their world, they had invited one of the most dangerous species in the galaxy to enter their system. They had placed their fate in the hands of creatures that most peaceful civilizations feared and avoided. I do not know if we made the right decision, Siora admitted. But I know we made the only decision. She turned to face her staff, who had gathered behind her with expressions of mixed hope and terror. Begin evacuation procedures for all major population centers, she ordered. Move civilians to the underground shelters. Prioritize children and medical facilities. And prepare for the possibility of surface combat as her people rushed to obey. Siora returned her gaze to the stars. Somewhere out there, the Deathworlders were coming, and somewhere out there, an unknown enemy was approaching with dark intentions. The Valith were caught between 2 forces they did not understand. All they could do now was wait and hope that the humans were as willing to protect. Strangers, as the story suggested, Siora whispered a prayer to the ancient spirits of her world. Then she began preparing her people for whatever was coming.